Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a first look at a tank that has been around and has been looked at by other YouTubers for quite a while now. The ST-62 version 2. Yeah, this tank has become a little bit notorious. It's one of the only, I believe it is currently the only remaining tier 10 tank in the files that is looking like it's going to be released semi-soon. It's a a Soviet reward medium tank that has some funky mechanics and may or may not be potentially rumored / confirmed to be coming out as a reward tank for the clan event maneuvers whenever we get that next one, which is looking like potentially November time. Very late, I know, but it's looking like November time. So, what is this tank? What is its strengths? What are its weaknesses? Well, DPM for a tier 10 medium tank, yeah, not great, 2,500, and it can't mount a gun rammer to improve that because it has a clip, so you're kind of fixed to being pretty stuck around 2.5k DPM. As 320 Alpha, its standard penetration is 260, which is not terrible, actually, that's pretty alright, and it's APCR, and it has heat as its gold pen with 330, which is, once again, pretty nice. In a clip kind of scenario, I feel like having heat clips are always pretty nice because you can, I feel like you can punish peaks a little bit more and semi-reliably pen them more. I don't know, it's personal preference, but this tank has a 3-round autoloader, which is gonna have a similar mechanic to the IS-3A. So the less shells you've got in the clip, the faster it reloads, if that makes sense. So the first shell in the clip reloads in 7.6 seconds, the second at 10.5, and the third at 13.4 seconds. So this is going to be a kind of tank you always want to clip out in. Try and have as low amount of shells in your clip as possible because it reloads quicker. So your DPM is better when you have less shells in the tank than when you have it, when you fire all 3 shells, then reload all 3 shells, if that makes sense. So you kind of want to fully clip out, and then just keep cyclically firing that first shot that reloads. And you are going to be able to clip out 960 damage in 4 seconds, which is pretty nice. And once again, as I said, you then are going to want to be reloading cyclically, which is going to give you a 7.6 seconds reload, which is pretty nice for 320 Alpha. Not the best, but it's pretty nice. Dispersion. Yeah, that's where we start to find some issues with this tank. 0.35 dispersion is not great for a medium tank. It's going to be good at medium to short range, but when you're kind of going beyond 200, 250 meters, yeah, you're going to be struggling. It's going to be a bit unreliable. So you kind of do want to play this tank in a more kind of aggressive way where you're going to be brawling more than where you're going to be sniping. 2.2 seconds aim time is alright. That's not going to hold it back, but the dispersion will at shooting at long range. What else has this tank got? Well, it's not slow. 50 kilometers an hour is pretty quick for a medium tank, but it's not the best in class. Not like the Leo, for example, but it's alright. 50 will allow you to get into aggressive positions, but not the most aggressive positions, if that makes sense. Has 6 degrees of gun depression, which is very standard for Russian medium tanks, you know, the 907, for example. And its armor is looking, once again, very Russian. A weak hull, but a decently strong turret. We'll have a look at its armor model in a second and see what that actually means as effective. And it has a decent amount of hit points at 1950, which you are probably going to be running a bond hardening on this tank because it's going to be a reward tank. You can get up to 2.2k, which is pretty nice for a clip tank. Means you can trade pretty effectively. And you have 390 meters view range, which is very generic. So you're not going to be spotting particularly well in this tank. It's not got a great view range, but 390 is, you know, it's passable. So what is this tank's 3D model looking like? Well, let's have a look at it visually first. It's a pretty interesting looking tank. Very small profile, so it's quite low down, and it's not very long. It feels very compact, you know. The engine deck is tiny. Kind of like the driver's area at the front is once again very tiny. It feels like a very small tank, almost like there's some some light tanks in the game that are bigger than this. Yeah, quite compact. What does that mean for the armor? Well, let's have a look at it live against its own APCR, which is 260 millimeters of penetration. Well, as you can see, the turret is very 907-140-esque, very round, very Russian, very Soviet, with a small cupola, which is going to be very easily penned. But the Cobola's not giant, it's not too small either, so it will be a weak point, but not the most, not the biggest weak point, basically. But this thing's turret against standard rounds is pretty effective. Let's see how it stacks up against heat. Well, a little bit worse, directly around the gun in the early cheeks, very similar to how the 140 can be penned in the cheeks, has a similar weak point. But it's only really, basically a 50-50. There are some areas where it's an 80% chance, but they are quite small. So this tank is going to be pretty effective at bouncing things through its turret, which is always good to know, I guess. Means you can kind of play it hull down, but this thing's hull will hold it back. It's very easily pennable frontally. We're talking, 230 millimeters at its thickest towards the edges, which everything at tier 8 is going to be able to pen standard rounds. And against gold, it becomes a little bit easier just to pen it. The area where you can shoot and pen becomes a lot bigger. Its whole lower plate becomes a weak point. But remember, this is a Russian tank, so it has that kind of 907-esque shaped hull. How does that actually stack up when we're potentially trying to side scrape? So yeah, a little bit better. So you are halving the amount of pennable hull, but this whole area here is just going to be penetratable. It becomes a little bit smaller if they're firing standard. So this tank is going to struggle at bouncing things effectively, especially even in a brawl situation. It's going to be really easy to pen because they just shoot your entire front hull and it's a weak point. And even when you're playing hull down, they will still be able to see likely a bar of your top hull, which, even with standard rounds, they are going to be penning. Even when you have it at an angle like this, it's still a very easy penetration. Doesn't really get any less easier to pen. So this thing doesn't particularly have the greatest armor hull-wise. Its turret is pretty strong, but it does have those weak points around the gun. So what is this tank's strengths going to be? Well, it's going to be basically played in a similar way, I feel, to how the Caro is played. It's going to be a 3-round, basically auto-reloader, where it's going to be clipping out where it can, trying to then keep as few shells in the gun as possible, trying to keep that DPM as high as possible, kind of peeking, shooting. It will do well on kind of more open maps where it can kind of use its mobility, use its speed to kind of outplay heavy tanks, get flank shots off. But it is not going to be the strongest on more brawly style maps because of its armor. And it isn't really going to be able to just sit in a hull down and be able to keep farming because its armor is not, the strongest to be able to do that. So it is going to be probably one of the weaker reward tanks that we do have in the game. It will probably be similar to the Caro in terms of its ability. Good players will be able to make it work just because they understand the game mechanics, rotation, positioning, timings. But for a more average player, this tank will perform pretty poorly. And if this is going to be a reward tank in maneuvers, and you do have the ability to pick another tank, for example, the VKK, yeah, I'd recommend picking the VKK. Even though this is the new tank, yeah, pick the VKK, it's better. But if you have all the other tanks, and because this is going to be a new one, this is your one to pick up, yeah. It might be quite fun to play in a platoon. It might be quite fun to play solo because it's a clip, and I find clip tanks are always a little bit more fun to play. But it is not going to be the best performing tank. It is not going to blow your socks off. It's definitely not going to be overpowered, so don't worry about that. But yeah, it's looking pretty average, we'll put it that way. It's got some strong points, but it's also got some pretty significant weaknesses that are pretty mitigatable, and you don't even really have to fire gold to be able to counter this tank, which some of you I know will love. But do let me know down in the comments what you think about this tank. This is likely going to be the final version of it. It's been changed so many times. But if we're expecting to see this tank in November, this is likely going to be the final version. But remember, it is a Supertest tank still, so everything here is subject to change. And once again, we may never see this tank, but it's highly likely we're going to see it as part of the Maneuvers event, because there is a 3D camo which is got the Maneuvers logo on, which is for this tank. So almost confirmed. But yeah. Do let me know down in the comments what you think, and if you like this video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!